Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the Q&A of Restrictions Apply. I hope everyone enjoyed the film, and please remember that this film is available for an audience award, so don't forget to rate all the films that you watch when you're done. I will also want to start by thanking our sponsors of this film, Race Matters SLO, Diversity Coalition of SLO County, and San Luis Obispo SCORE. And this film is a part of our Central Coast Filmmaker Showcase, which is sponsored by Films for Good through Bob and Christine Williams. So thank you all to our sponsors. We couldn't do this without you. And we're really excited to have Justice Whitaker here, the director and editor of Restrictions Apply, Jamie Lewis, the protagonist and producer of the film, and Courtney Hale, executive producer, with us here today. And thanks so much for joining us. And where is everyone calling in from today?
I'm in San Luis.
Okay.
I'm in beautiful San Luis Obispo, California.
I'm the outlier.
Yeah.
I'm here in Brooklyn, New York, where the post-production was done for the film, and also where the directing for the film was done from, as well as other parts of my life. So there is a really wonderful international component and sort of global feel to this film, because Jamie was on the road to Sacramento with our DP, Joe, and we had a satellite crew working in Minneapolis, and so yeah, and then also our illustrator is in Japan. So there's a certain thing of a coalescing of people, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so great about this story too, is it's very SLO specific, but I'm pretty sure this could apply to many different places across the US. And I'm curious, Justice, though, how you connected with Jamie and you found about the topic and you wanted to explore.
Yeah, that's really actually Courtney's story to tell.
Yeah.
But to dovetail into it, Courtney and I, this is our second film that we've done, and also the second film that Race Matters has ever produced. So that's sort of a relationship that Courtney and I are continuing to build upon. And so I was reached out to by Race Matters at a point that a story was already developing and that Courtney had made the decision to make a film out of that. So the relationship really began with Courtney and Jamie.
Yeah. So Jamie wrote into Race Matters, and back in June, we did get a lot of people writing in due to George Floyd, really, and the awakening, the reckoning, which we had a local reckoning as well. And so Jamie wrote in and mentioned that she had this racial covenant, and I'd remembered that I'd heard about her before, and something about the timing just made me think that now was the time to explore the story. And I thought that her reckoning with the racial covenant on her private home deed and talking to her neighbors, telling them about it, was a really good entry point for our community and other communities into systemic racism, really, because it's just such a blatant, black and white, no pun intended, thing to see the language there and to unpack that. And so I thought that Jamie being able to just talk to her neighbors about it and then amplifying it through film would be a good story and educational tool. So I kind of saw that vision, and when she wrote in and with the timing and everything, it seemed like a good idea. So I called Stephanie, as I do sometimes, Stephanie Allen, shout out. And sometimes we feed off each other and ideas start happening.
That's it. Yeah, totally.
That's awesome. And I'm curious, Jamie, if you are exploring other covenants that exist within SLO County, if this is kind of, because that's what I thought when I saw this film, is like, this exists in one place, this must be there in the rest of the county as well. And if that's kind of, inspired you to look into this further.
Yeah, I mean, through the course of making the film, I wanted to know, were we unusual. And also, I don't think this film could have happened without the help of all the other communities who have done this, who have addressed it, you know, searched for it, addressed it, and thought about it. I mean, that was one of the threads that we started to pull, or that definitely that I started to pull in doing the research for this, was where else have people, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. I think, like, is this real? Is it real? And is it only here? And is it only on my property? I mean, the amount of conversation and research that had to go into giving us as a team the confidence that we could make a film about this was pretty substantial. But seeing there was some help from some other folks on the Race Matters Steering Committee that helped with looking around at some of covenants and stories of communities who have, you know, come to terms with them, actively come to terms with them. And they exist all over the US. It's been said, and I haven't ever verified this, but 50% of properties in the United States may have a racial
Mhm.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, we've looked into
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think it ties into, I know this question's been coming up in SLO a lot, you know, is we're a predominantly white area, and, you know, why is this? And it's actually written here in this history, you know, in these laws, in these restrictions. And I think the more we draw attention to that, you know, the more that we can hopefully change that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious though, did you find that people were more open to having this conversation because of the protests and because of the murder of George Floyd? Or, you know, do you think they still would have been open a year before all of that happened?
Mhm.
Hello?
I saw that my neighbors were extremely receptive. And I'm sure a big part of that is that it was at the top of their mind. I
Mhm.
mean, the news cycle was dominated by people trying to reckon or not reckon with our racist past. And so I was really delighted to find that my neighbors were thinking the way I was, that this mattered to them the way it mattered to me. And yeah, I would say that that was one of the biggest gifts of making the film, was getting to talk to my neighbors about, you know, things that you don't always, you know, uh, hey Bob, how's your niece doing? You know, it's a little different from, hey Bob, did you know that the property you're living on has a restriction that says that people other than Caucasians can't live there? When would you ever have occasion to talk about that? So that was one of the cool things about doing the film, but it was also one of the cool things about having the restrictions struck together. It's kind of up for debate. It's very much up for debate whether people should strike their covenants out. However, I will say one good thing about doing that was there was a community organizing piece that was really amazing. We all got together to do something. So that part of it, I think, was just really beneficial. It just, even for the fabric of my community.
Yeah, I feel like more and more these days we kind of lost that connection to each other, and being able to just, yeah, talk to each other about more than just that surface stuff, I think is really meaningful. Justice, I'm curious what it was like for you, as someone who grew up here in the area, to learn about this and come into this project. And I know we had a film of yours last year that also Courtney produced, Cut to Be the Best, the last Black barbershop in SLO. And and that was a similar kind of focusing, you know, on the lack of diversity in SLO and everything. And so I'm curious, because I know that you live in Brooklyn, and what it's like to be making films here and bringing these stories back here.
Yeah, Sky, that's really an important sort of intersection for me. Obviously, I mean, I live in Brooklyn for a reason. That's because I love living around Black people, you know, and at 18, when I left San Luis Obispo, that was like urgent. I had an urgent feeling. And then as a creative and as a filmmaker, like I didn't have any reason to make films about San Luis Obispo per se. I loved going home. I love being in SLO. It's wonderful there. I embrace that. It's nostalgic. I mean, my family's there. The South County is like, that's my spiritual center. So I don't, you know what I mean? But in terms of the cultural experience, obviously it's a difficult, you know, thing. As a Black person, you know, to live there or to enjoy being there from that sort of perspective. Also, things are different now. Like things are different. Courtney grew up there. Like things are different. We have a lot of different energy around the Black community in the last even like 5 years. Even part like Race Matters is part of that, you know what I mean? So there's a lot, it's a lot different than like 1999 when I was just like, cool, peace, I'm gonna go to like Thailand, Europe, Portland, Oregon, and then just like land in New York and never leave. You know, that's a different formula. But about the work, I am thankful to Race Matters and the connection and the opportunity to tell those stories. Cut to Be the Best is very, you know, sort of auteur driven, Michael Moore-esque, you know, I'm part of the film, I'm telling my own story. So that was great. You know, that was really powerful and wonderful to be part of that. This is a different story, but I'm really committed to San Luis Obispo. I've been, you know, staying linked in with all of the different sort of developments that have happened over the past year, politically, socially. That's all very important to me. I have a personal relationship with Heidi Harmon, and like all of these things, I'm connected to my home where I grew up. And so to tell these stories is important. And I want to continue to communicate to audiences, to San Luis Obispo audiences. That's part of, you know, who I believe my story will have an impact on, and that's why I make films. So yeah, it's a blessing, and this film was a blessing. Like, who can raise their hand and say they produced work in 2020? Not everybody, you know. From my standpoint, like my creative peers, everybody was like in these weird writer blocks, and and production was all shut down everywhere, and you know, so there was like this other thing going on, and because I'm just like a wild creative, was still just like producing articles and writing scripts and just being like, nothing can stop me. Pandemic means nothing. And then I started working at Sesame Street, and all of that was like, then let's make this movie as well. And, you know, that was part of it. So this was a whirlwind project. I believe technology, I believe a new like open mind to remote work that happened globally in 2020, and a lot of other factors sort of contributed to the ability for this to happen. Having a really talented director of photography on the ground, and having Jamie be like super open and access is key for documentary storytelling. So a lot of things coalesced. Courtney is the champion of that and bringing things together and knowing, you know, what pieces that she needs to put in place. It was like a really great support crew for this, more than I think we learned a lot from Cut to Be the Best, Courtney. Like we just like Cut to Be the Best was just like Courtney and I in the trenches, just like the most verite sort of storytelling experience possible. And then you know, and you know, we brought in Stephanie Allen like to really help with notes. She has a lot of experience coming out of the industry, and you know, really just scaffolded the team so that we could have the best chance for success. And I definitely think that is reflected in the work. It's been an honor, and it's like something that I'm really proud of. So that's important too, you know.
Yeah, something just beyond the meaning of the film. It's a beautiful film, and I love the mixture of, you know, the digital video and the Super 8 footage, which I assume, and I think that is Joanna, the cinematographer that you had. And we have another one of her films, Stoke Chasers, this year, where she also shoots on Super 8. I'm just wondering if you talked about that, like all or like what your thinking was behind that.
Yeah, well, you know, if you look at Cut to Be the Best, all of my work, like I've never stopped shooting film. That's sort of like as younger generations like Joanna grow into, you know, the millennials, like film is cool, vinyl is cool. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm cool. Like, let's go. This is where it's always been. I've always been there. So I love that. I looked at Joanna's work from the very beginning and was like, wow, you're shooting on film. You're in this zone. That's always been my aesthetic. All of my work has some sort of analog capacity. So in that way, that was like a match made in heaven. Beyond that, I am very much as an artist about the structure and the content having an important relationship. You know, I don't believe that all forms are the right, you know, form to tell certain stories. This has a certain historic importance. So bringing in that analog, which is both Super 8 as well as 16 millimeter film, was the really crystal clear touch, as well as working with the illustrator, you know what I mean? And those are things that, like, you can see my early work at NYU, I have like illustrations being folded in and it's choppy and you know, and in this case, it's mostly, we just created that beautiful title sequence, which I love as much as anything else, you know, but all of that was about creating a sort of tone for the film and helping to understand that, you know, this is historic. And that was something that was also, for me as a director, I was feeding off of Jamie for that, because Jamie, even though it doesn't fully end up in the film, has some beautiful interviews where she's talking about the tactile experience, the font, the typeface, you know, all these things that help you understand that you're dealing with something that's old and that has this sort of systemic and very deeply rooted, you know, power in it. So I wanted to capture that in the film. And that was something that, of course, I'm aware of. And as a creative, I'm always looking for that relationship between the content and the structure. But it was tipped off by Jamie, and knowing that she had to go to archives. I love microfiche. I love digging in that, you know, so she's telling me she's doing those things to have this experience. So I wanted this film, as brief as it is, to have a certain texture, because that's the experience, I think.
I definitely feel like you achieved that, and it's one of my favorite parts. And I love the end credits to the illustrations. I wasn't expecting that, and they just like get better and better. So it's always good to have that. I'm curious for you and Courtney, do you have some plans in the works for future films or larger films maybe that you want to share with us?
I mean, you never know, but both these films happened very impulsively. And so that, you know, since that's in my nature,
organically,
it could always happen again. It seems to be a pattern. But, you know, you can always, you know, maybe longer, maybe more, but no immediate plans for another story. But this is a really great story. And there's still unfinished business with Cut, because as you know, Sky, the you know, COVID came and did its thing. And it did its thing with the barbers too. So so we're gonna circle back on that, and then also dig into restriction supply. And Jamie has some wonderful ideas about neighborhood screenings and neighborhood talks, and some folks are interested in the film as an educational tool, which is wonderful. And I think it's something that's family friendly and a good intro to children, for sure, on systemic racism in a way that they can very easily understand it. And so we'll see about the future.
Well, yeah, we definitely want to get the word out about this film and help promote it as much as possible. And not because, as I said before, this isn't just a story unique to SLO. This is happening all over in our county, San Luis Obispo County, and yeah, across the US. So I think, yeah, having it as an educational tool will be really, really valuable. And Jamie, I'm curious, yeah, so are you, what you are working on next, or if you are gonna be looking into more covenants, or yeah, what you're doing, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, well, I did want to keep doing things and I wasn't quite sure what to do. And then Courtney and I did a screening, and Justice was on it too, for the annual social justice teach-in at Cal Poly. That was, I think, last week. And at the end, there were so many people on that call. I couldn't believe it. And at the end, my phone and my email, everything just blowing up. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And Courtney said, oh, I forgot, when you make a documentary, people want to do something. So I had already had, kind of like small plans to do something, but then we start thinking about the possibilities. I've been in discussion with somebody who used to be a neighbor around the street, across the street from me, who is working in the sociology department at Cal Poly. And she said, what can my students do? How can we help? And I said, Dr. Kirsten Delegard in Minneapolis would like to partner with other universities to develop programs like this. So we're putting them together to do work here. But then also I'd love to do kind of, guerrilla neighborhood organizing with making the film available, maybe having people screen it at home. And then they have to do a couple other of the resources, which shout out to our resources page. The restrictions apply resources page is really pretty comprehensive, and I keep adding to it. But if we ask people who want to view the film and talk about it with their neighbors, to look at a couple of the other things on there, their podcast episodes. They're like 5-minute long explanations of what redlining is and its effects. So many other good resources on this. And then get together, in a driveway and masked and 6 feet apart and all of that, and talk about, okay, if you want to have your covenant removed, fine, and we'll hook you up with the paperwork and how to turn it in, and a notary even. But let's talk about other ways to address this as well, like repudiation language in your deed, or not removing it and having a conversation about it that's meaningful. But then, if we talk about really good work, we have discussed very small, very, very short. We talked about Justice perhaps writing a semester or quarter-long curriculum for it, much in the way that 1619 happened. There's, an artistic work that then spiraled out to be, this talk back on steroids, done in the way that it really deserves to be done. So there's talk about that too.
That's awesome, and kudos for you for getting that together, and as well to Courtney, to you at Race Matters SLO. You have had so many resources and so many outlets and things for people who do want to take action and create change, and it made it easy for people to get that information, and I think that's just been so incredible. So thank you for that. It's just been really, really amazing work. Does anyone have any final comments before we leave?
One final comment. I think, Jamie, whether you like it or not, there's going to be a lot of people looking to you as sort of the local covenant expert, and not just covenant expert, but how you demonstrate just talking about race and being uncomfortable in it. And I think, or I always thought that a lot of people in our community can relate to you in ways, and that you demonstrate allyship in a non-typical, it's not the typical maybe stereotype of the woke, like the woke ally, but more something that's relatable and approachable for a lot of folks. And so I think whether you like it or not, your phone might ring more with people.
Well, I think that that just, for me, as a closing note, as a director, I think that just speaks to the power of cinema. And I think that, as an activist, this is where I find my voice. But look what, how all of that is related. It creates, there's always a storm around it, right? It's never just the movie, anything that, and I think you saw that with Cut too, a lot of people who are like focused on the community and how can we support Terry and how can we do other things that were, related to that. So it's important to see that, and it's important to see that in the work. And again, I think Courtney and, Jamie, I think we have to see more white people who are willing to have this conversation. You know, Black folks are just like, why do we have to talk about racism? This is just, we're on the receiving end of all this, and then we have to talk about it all day and explain how it all works. So, you know, I'm interested to see how this film performs like at Black focused film festivals. Like, it's clearly not a Black protagonist, but it's clearly the voice of a Black filmmaker, and about how I see, you know, this overall process of deconstructing all these ideas. So, you know, I just hope that more filmmakers can see work like this, and be inspired to create more work like this. And I hope more audiences can see the social work that, you know, Jamie does, and also be more inspired to create more work like that. And I hope more film festivals can look at SLO Fest and be like, wow, we should feature more work just like this, you know. So it's just blessings all the way around. I thank you guys, everybody, for making this moment happen and amplifying it like you can, Sky, and everything else. So I appreciate it.
And thank you all. You know, I'm really excited that, you know, these stories are being told in SLO, and as someone who's grown up here too, you know, it and I've seen it, and just like you, Justice, I'm white, but I always felt like there wasn't any diversity here, you know, and that was a big reason why I moved to the city in San Francisco and wanted to expose myself to more. And so, yeah, it's strange to come back here, and a lot of stuff is the same, but there is stuff changing, and that's what's exciting to me. And things like your film, and your previous films, it's really exciting. So thank you.
My final thought would just be, I'm very grateful to both Courtney and Justice for different things. I'm so grateful to Courtney for even seeing this as an opportunity to talk to people. I had no intention, trust me, I did not come into this thinking, yeah, let's open up my home and open up my head and open up my mouth and tell everybody what I think about race. That was not something I was asking for, but Courtney saw it as an opportunity to be a narrative that would talk to people, that would they would see maybe themselves in me and my confusion and my, you know, how then do we live, that kind of question. And then for Justice, who you know, he talks about having access to me. Well, I had access to him too, and I called one time walking around trying to talk to neighbors, and I said, I am so freaked out right now. Who in their right mind would talk about race in a film where people know where I live? And he said, they don't care. They don't care. It's not about you. And I needed that to feel like we could then be a team cohesively to tell a pretty American story, really.
Yes, and thanks, Jamie, for your real honesty in the film. I think, you know, being so transparent is what really makes this film sing. So yeah, I appreciate that. All right, everyone. Well, that's our time.